am Elena Rodriguez. I'm 28 years old, a painter living in Portland, Oregon. My life is like an unfinished canvas, splashed with vibrant colors of dreams and shadowed by the gray expectations of those who claim to love me. I grew up in a traditional Hispanic family where my parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, believed success meant becoming a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Anything else was considered a hobby, not a career. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. My easel stands in the corner of my small studio apartment, covered with half-finished paintings that tell stories my family refuses to hear. Each brushstroke carries my soul, but to my parents they're just colorful distractions from what they call real life. My older sister Isabella, 31, is everything they ever wanted in a daughter. She's a successful pediatrician with a perfect house in the suburbs, married to a cardiologist named Marcus. Every family gathering becomes a showcase of Isabella's achievements while my art is dismissed with polite smiles and concerned whispers. "When are you going to get serious about your future, Mija?" My mother asks every time I visit, her eyes scanning my paint-stained fingers with disappointment. My father is less subtle. "You're Arshaba, Elena. Time to grow up and find a real job." These words cut deeper each time, but I've learned to nod and change the subject, protecting my dreams from their crushing reality. My boyfriend of 3 years, James, is the lighthouse in my stormy relationship with my family. He's 30, works as a graphic designer, and understands the artist's struggle better than anyone. James has sandy brown hair and kind blue eyes that light up whenever I show him a new piece. "You're going to make it big someday," he always says, kissing my forehead while paint still drips from my brush. He's the only one who sees my potential when the world sees only my failures. Portland's art scene is competitive and unforgiving. Gallery owners glance at my portfolio for 30 seconds before shaking their heads. "It's beautiful, but not what we're looking for right now," they say with practiced politeness. I've heard those words so many times they've lost their sting, but the rejection still burns. My bank account hovers near zero while I work part-time at a local coffee shop, serving lattes to people living the stable lives my parents dream of for me. Some nights I sit in my studio with James, surrounded by canvases that nobody wants to buy. The smell of oil paint mingles with the aroma of chamomile tea as we dream about the future. "One day your paintings will hang in museums," James whispers, his hand warm on my shoulder. In those moments I believe him. I believe that my sacrifices will mean something, that my art will touch lives the way music touched souls. Last Christmas, I decided to bring James home to meet my family. I wanted them to see that I wasn't alone, that someone believed in me and my dreams. I imagined my mother smiling as she served her famous tamales, my father actually asking James about his work, and Isabella treating me like an equal instead of a cautionary tale. I spent weeks preparing for that dinner, cleaning my apartment, buying new clothes, and coaching James on family dynamics. The Rodriguez family home in East Portland was decorated with twinkling lights and the scent of cinnamon filled the air. My grandmother's recipe for pozole bubbled on the stove while my mother bustled around the kitchen in her best dress. "Don't worry," James whispered as we approached the front door, his hand finding mine. "They're going to love you even more when they see how happy you make me." Dinner started well enough. Isabella dominated the conversation with stories about her latest medical conference and her promotion to department head. Marcus, her husband, nodded approvingly while discussing his research on cardiac surgery. My parents beamed with pride, hanging on every word about their successful daughter and son-in-law. James tried to join the conversation, mentioning his recent project designing a campaign for a local nonprofit, but the topic quickly shifted back to medicine and financial success. "Elena, are you still painting?" My mother asked, her tone suggesting she was inquiring about a childhood hobby I should have outgrown. I nodded, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Yes, I just finished a series about urban nature. James thinks they're some of my best work." I squeezed his hand under the table, grateful for his support. My father cleared his throat. "That's nice, Mija, but don't you think it's time to consider something more stable?" Isabella could probably get you an administrative position at the hospital. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking my dreams with their practical poison. James squeezed my hand tighter, a silent reminder that he believed in me even when my family didn't. After dinner, the men retreated to the living room to watch football while Isabella and my mother cleaned up in the kitchen. I offered to help, hoping for a moment of connection with the women in my family. "Go ahead," James said, kissing my cheek. "I'll keep your dad and Marcus company." As I entered the kitchen, I felt optimistic about bridging the gap between my dreams and their expectations. I was drying dishes when I overheard my mother's voice, low but clear, coming from the pantry where she was putting away leftovers. "Isabella, you need to talk to Marcus about Elena's boyfriend," she said, her words careful but urgent. My hands froze on the plate I was drying, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What do you mean, Mommy?" Isabella's voice carried the authority she wielded at the hospital, but also confusion. "That boy, James, he's sweet, but he's encouraging Elena's foolishness. She needs someone who will make her see sense, not someone who feeds her fantasies." My mother's words felt like daggers, each one piercing deeper than the last. Marcus could introduce her to one of his colleagues, someone stable who could give her a real future. Isabella was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath, hoping she would defend me. Instead, her voice carried resignation. "You might be right, Mommy. Elena is talented, but she's living in a fantasy. Maybe someone more grounded could help her see reality." "Exactly," my mother continued, her voice gaining confidence. "James seems nice, but he's just another dreamer. Elena needs a man who will take care of her, not one who will let her waste her life on paintings nobody wants to buy. You know how these artistic types are, they never grow up." I stepped away from the kitchen, my legs shaking as I made my way to the bathroom. In the mirror, my face was pale, my dark eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The family I had desperately wanted to impress had just dismissed the man I loved and the life we were building together. They saw James not as my partner and supporter, but as an obstacle to their vision of my future. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled and laughed at the right moments, but inside a storm was brewing. James held my hand on the drive home, chatting about how nice my family seemed, completely unaware of the conversation that had shattered my illusions. "Your dad warmed up to me by the end," he said happily. "And Isabella was really interested in my work." I nodded and made appropriate responses, but all I could hear were my mother's words echoing in my mind. In the days following Christmas, I started noticing changes in my family's behavior. My mother called more frequently, always with suggestions about practical career moves or mentions of successful young men she knew. Isabella invited me to lunch more often, subtly steering conversations toward the benefits of financial stability and the importance of planning for the future. Even my grandmother, usually my biggest supporter, started questioning whether art could really provide for a family. "Mija," she said during one visit, her weathered hands holding mine across her kitchen table, "your paintings are beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay the bills. Maybe it's time to think about art as something you do on weekends, no?" Her words hurt more than my parents' direct criticism because they came wrapped in love and concern. The pressure intensified when my mother arranged for me to meet Dr. Antonio Herrera, a successful psychiatrist who had recently divorced and was, according to my mother, looking for the right kind of woman to start fresh with. She invited him to a family barbecue without telling me, presenting it as a casual gathering with family friends. Antonio was handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed, and spoke confidently about his practice and his plans to expand into private consultation work. "Elena," my mother whispered when Antonio was getting a drink, "he's perfect for you. Stable, successful, and he finds your artistic nature charming." Those were his exact words. The way she emphasized charming made it clear that Antonio saw my art the same way she did, as a cute quirk that would eventually be abandoned for more serious pursuits. I watched James across the yard, laughing with my father about something completely unrelated to career success or financial planning. His joy was genuine, unmarked by ambition or calculation. When he caught my eye, he winked, and I felt the familiar flutter of love mixed with the new weight of family disapproval. The contrast between James's authentic happiness and Antonio's polished confidence was stark, and I knew which one represented the life I actually wanted. But the seed of doubt had been planted. My family's constant questioning made me second-guess everything. Was I being selfish, choosing love over security? Was James really helping me grow, or was he enabling my refusal to face reality? These thoughts plagued me during late-night painting sessions, when exhaustion made my defenses weak and their arguments seemed almost reasonable. The breaking point came 3 months later. I had been working on a series called Urban Dreams, paintings that captured the beauty and struggle of city life through abstract representations. One piece, Broken Windows, Golden Light, showed an abandoned building with sunlight streaming through shattered glass, creating patterns of hope amid decay. I was proud of this series, feeling like I had finally found my voice as an artist. James and I were having dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant when I told him about a gallery opening that weekend. The owner said she might be interested in showing some of my work if the right opportunity comes up, I said excitedly, twirling pad thai around my chopsticks. This could be it, James. This could be my breakthrough. His face lit up with the joy I had fallen in love with. Elena, that's amazing. I knew someone would see your talent eventually. We should celebrate. We clinked our beer bottles together, both giddy with the possibility of success finally arriving. That night, we made love with an intensity that spoke to shared dreams and mutual support, two people believing in a future that seemed finally within reach. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Isabella, her voice strained and formal. Elena, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee this morning? It's important. Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I agreed to meet her at our usual cafe downtown. James kissed me goodbye as I left, his lips still warm from morning coffee, his eyes still bright with the previous night's celebration. Isabella was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a large mug. She looked tired, older than her 31 years, and she avoided eye contact as I sat down across from her. What's wrong? I asked immediately, fear creeping into my voice. Is someone sick? ¿Y si tu abuela? No, everyone's fine, she said quickly, then paused, staring into her coffee as if it held answers to questions she didn't want to ask. Elena, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. She finally looked up, her dark eyes, so similar to mine, filled with something between pity and determination. James came to see me yesterday, she began, and my world immediately felt unstable. He's worried about you, Elena. About your health, your future, your obsession with painting. The word obsession hit me like a physical blow. James would never use that word to describe my art. He understood that painting wasn't an obsession, it was oxygen. That's impossible, I said, my voice shaky. James supports my art. He believes in me. Isabella shook her head slowly, her expression mixing sadness with what looked like relief. He said he's been hiding his concerns because he loves you, but watching you struggle is killing him. He's tired of seeing you fail over and over, tired of supporting someone who won't face reality. Each word felt like a betrayal, but Isabella's tone carried the authority she used when delivering difficult diagnoses to parents. He asked me to help convince you to consider other options, she continued. He mentioned that Dr. Herrera was interested in you and suggested that maybe someone more stable could help you transition to a more practical life. My sister's words created a roaring in my ears, drowning out the cafe's ambient noise. I sat there, speechless, as Isabella continued explaining James's supposed concerns. According to her, he had been documenting my episodes, times when I painted for hours without eating, when gallery rejections sent me into tears, when I talked about art with what he apparently called manic intensity. She painted a picture of a man who had been silently suffering while watching the woman he loved destroy herself with impossible dreams. He loves you enough to let you go, Isabella concluded, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I jerked away from her touch, my mind reeling with confusion and disbelief. The James she described was a stranger, someone who saw my passion as pathology and my dreams as delusions. It couldn't be true. But doubt, once introduced, spreads like infection. I thought about recent conversations with James, searching for signs of hidden frustration or concealed pity. Had his encouragement been forced? Were his compliments about my art simply kindness disguised as support? The more I analyzed our interactions, the more uncertain I became about everything I thought I knew. "I don't believe you," I finally whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. Isabella nodded sympathetically, as if she had expected my denial. "I knew you'd react this way. That's why James asked me to talk to you. He knew you wouldn't listen if it came from him directly." I stumbled out of the cafe in a daze, Isabella's words echoing in my mind like a cruel mantra. The walk home felt endless, each step heavy with the weight of potential betrayal. By the time I reached my apartment, I had convinced myself that there must be some explanation, some misunderstanding that would restore my faith in the man I loved. James was in my studio when I arrived, standing before broken windows, golden light, with his hands behind his back. For a moment, he looked like the same person who had celebrated with me the night before, but Isabella's words had created a filter that changed everything I saw. "Hey, beautiful," he said without turning around. "I was just looking at your latest piece. It's really something." "Isabella told me about your conversation," I said without preamble, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. James turned around, his expression immediately shifting from casual admiration to something more guarded. The change was subtle, but after 3 years together I could read his micro-expressions like text on a page. "What conversation?" he asked, but his eyes darted away from mine for just a moment, long enough to confirm Isabella's story. In that instant I felt something inside me break, not dramatically but with the quiet crack of glass under too much pressure. "The one where you told her you're worried about my obsession with painting. The one where you said watching me fail is killing you." My words came out flat, emotionless, as if I were reading someone else's script. James's face went through a series of changes: surprise, guilt, resignation, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. He sat down heavily on my painting stool, his head in his hands. "Elena, He started, then stopped, gathering himself before continuing. "I do love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But watching you torture yourself with these impossible dreams is destroying both of us." Each word confirmed my worst fears while simultaneously revealing a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. "Impossible dreams?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You said I was going to make it big someday. You said my paintings would hang in museums." "I said what you needed to hear," he replied, looking up at me with eyes that seemed older than they had that morning. "I thought if I believed hard enough for both of us, maybe somehow it would work out. But Elena, you're 28. You've been trying for 10 years with nothing to show for it except debt and heartbreak." The cruelty of his words was magnified by their gentle delivery. He spoke as if he were trying to save me from myself, as if his betrayal was an act of love. "Your family is right," he continued, apparently oblivious to the devastation spreading across my face. "You need stability. You need someone who can take care of you properly." "Someone like dear Herrera?" The question came out bitter and broken. James nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Antonio is a good man. He could give you the life you deserve, even if you can't see that right now." The casual way he said Antonio's name suggested this wasn't the first time they had discussed my future without me. I walked to my easel and touched the edge of Broken Windows, Golden Light, the painting I had been so proud of just hours before. Under the harsh fluorescent light of betrayal, it looked amateur, the color choices questionable and the composition flawed. Maybe they were all right. Maybe I had been living in a fantasy, supported by people who were too kind to tell me the truth. "I need you to leave," I said quietly, still staring at my painting. "I need you to take your things and go, and I need you to never come back." My voice remained steady, but inside, everything was collapsing. James stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. "Elena, please don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, reaching for my shoulder. I stepped away from his touch, wrapping my arms around myself like armor. "I'll always love you, but we both deserve better than this struggle." After James left, taking 3 years of shared memories in 2 cardboard boxes, I sat alone in my studio surrounded by paintings that suddenly looked like evidence of my delusion. The silence was complete, unmarked by his familiar sounds or the easy comfort of his presence. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly alone with my art, and the solitude felt like drowning. I called in sick to work for the rest of the week, spending my days staring at canvases and questioning everything I had believed about myself. The gallery owner who had expressed interest in my work called to schedule a meeting, but I let it go to voicemail, too paralyzed by doubt to face another potential rejection. My family called repeatedly, but I ignored their attempts to reach out, knowing they would see James's departure as vindication of their concerns. On the 4th day of my self-imposed isolation, my mother arrived with groceries and determination. "Mija," she said, letting herself into my apartment with the spare key I had given her for emergencies, "you can't hide forever." She found me in my studio, still wearing the same clothes from 3 days before, staring at a blank canvas as if it might reveal the secrets of the universe. "I know you're hurt," she continued, setting down bags of food and pulling me into her arms. "But maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe James leaving will help you see what's really important." Her embrace smelled like the vanilla perfume she had worn my entire life, a scent that usually brought comfort but now only emphasized how lost I felt. "Maybe you were right," I said into her shoulder, my voice muffled by her sweater. "Maybe I am living in a fantasy. Maybe it's time to grow up and face reality." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but saying them aloud felt like stepping onto solid ground after years of floating in uncertainty. My mother pulled back to look at my face, her dark eyes bright with tears and what looked like relief. "Oh, sweetheart, I know it hurts now, but you'll see. You'll find someone who can give you the life you deserve, someone who won't encourage your hobbies at the expense of your future." The way she said hobbies made me look around my studio with new eyes. Dozens of paintings leaned against the walls, representing hundreds of hours of work and thousands of dollars in supplies. Was this all just an expensive hobby? Had I been fooling myself about having talent, about having something important to say through my art? That night, I started going through my paintings methodically, trying to see them objectively for the first time. Some pieces looked juvenile, others technically flawed. A few still spoke to me, but I questioned whether my emotional attachment was clouding my judgment. By morning, I had moved most of my work into storage, keeping only a few pieces that seemed genuinely accomplished. The empty studio felt like a fresh start and a funeral parlor simultaneously. Without the visual chaos of my artistic output, the room looked larger but somehow less alive. I sat at my easel, staring at the blank canvas, and realized I had no idea what I wanted to paint anymore. The voice that had driven my art for years had gone silent, replaced by the practical whispers of family expectations and social pressure. Antonio called that afternoon. "Isabella gave me your number," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I heard you were going through a difficult time, and I thought maybe you could use a friend." His offer was kind, his tone respectful, and I found myself agreeing to meet him for coffee the following day. Dr. Antonio Herrera was everything my family had promised: successful, stable, and genuinely interested in my well-being. Over coffee, he listened to my story without judgment, offering insights drawn from his professional training and personal experience. "Transitions are always difficult," he said, his hand briefly touching mine across the small cafe table. "But they also represent opportunities for growth and new beginnings." "I don't know who I am if I'm not a painter," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "For 10 years, that's been my identity. Without it, I feel lost." Antonio nodded understandingly, his dark eyes reflecting genuine concern. "Identity is more fluid than we think," he replied thoughtfully. "You're a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman with intelligence and creativity that could flourish in many different directions. Your art doesn't have to disappear entirely. It could become part of a richer, more balanced life." His words were seductive in their reasonableness. As we talked, I began to imagine a different version of myself, one who painted on weekends while building a stable career, who found satisfaction in practical accomplishments rather than the endless uncertainty of artistic pursuit. Antonio spoke about his work with quiet passion, describing how helping patients overcome mental challenges gave him a sense of purpose that transcended mere financial success. "I have a patient," he said, lowering his voice to maintain confidentiality, "a young woman who spent years chasing an impossible dream. She was miserable, anxious, constantly disappointed. 6 months after she changed careers, she's happier than she's ever been. Sometimes what we think we want isn't what we actually need." Our coffee date stretched into lunch, then into a walk through Powell's books, where Antonio bought me a biography of Frida Kahlo. "She never stopped being an artist," he said as he handed me the book, "but she also lived a full life beyond her art. There's a lesson there, I think." The gift felt thoughtful rather than calculated, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. Over the following weeks, Antonio and I continued meeting regularly. He introduced me to his world: medical conferences, charity galas, sophisticated dinner parties where conversation ranged from literature to politics to humanitarian causes. I discovered that I could hold my own in these environments, that my creativity translated into interesting perspectives on complex topics. People seemed to enjoy talking with me, and several mentioned job opportunities in arts administration or cultural programming. Meanwhile, my family celebrated my apparent transformation. Isabella called daily to check on my progress, sharing stories about successful women who had found happiness by choosing stability over uncertainty. My mother cooked elaborate meals whenever Antonio and I visited, her face glowing with satisfaction as she watched us together. "Finally," she whispered to me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner, "you're making smart choices." Even my father, usually reserved with his emotions, pulled me aside during one visit. "Mija, I'm proud of you," he said, his weathered hands gentle on my shoulders. "Antonio is a good man. He'll take care of you the way you deserve." The approval I had craved my entire life was finally mine, but it felt hollow, like a victory in someone else's war. 3 months after James left, I accepted a position as program coordinator at the Portland Art Museum. The job combined my knowledge of art with practical administrative skills, offering good benefits and opportunities for advancement. On my first day, I walked through galleries filled with masterpieces, feeling simultaneously at home and like a tourist in my own passion. My supervisor, Margaret Chen, was a sharp woman in her 50s who had built a career in arts administration after abandoning her own dreams of becoming a sculptor. "You have good instincts," she told me after my first week, "and you understand artists because you've been there. That combination will serve you well in this field." The work was satisfying in unexpected ways. I helped organize exhibitions, coordinated educational programs, and worked directly with artists who reminded me of my former self. Seeing their struggles from the administrative side gave me perspective on the challenges I had faced, but it also stirred something I was trying to suppress. Antonio and I grew closer as summer turned to fall. He was attentive, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in building a future together. Our relationship progressed naturally. Dinners became overnight stays, which became long weekends at his beautifully appointed house in the West Hills. He was an excellent cook, a thoughtful conversationalist, and a gentle lover who made me feel cherished rather than desired. "I love watching you discover yourself," he told me one evening as we sat on his deck overlooking the city. Portland spread out below us like a constellation, beautiful and distant. "You're becoming the woman you were always meant to be." His words should have filled me with joy, but instead they made me feel like an imposter wearing someone else's life. The empty studio in my apartment had become a home office where I worked on museum projects in the evenings. I had stored my easel in the basement, telling myself I would set it up again when I had time to paint for pleasure rather than desperation. But weeks turned to months, and I never found that time. The creative voice that had once demanded expression had gone completely silent, replaced by the efficient practicality my new life required. My family's satisfaction with my transformation was complete when Antonio and I got engaged during Christmas dinner. He proposed traditionally, dropping to one knee beside my parents' tree while my entire extended family watched. The ring was beautiful, a classic solitaire that caught the light from the twinkling decorations. My mother cried with joy, my father shook Antonio's hand with genuine warmth, and Isabella hugged me with the fierce affection of someone whose prayers had been answered. "I'm so happy for you, Hermana," she whispered in my ear as the family celebrated around us. "You finally figured out what matters most." Everyone was so pleased, so relieved, so convinced that I had finally found my path that I almost believed them myself. The wedding planning consumed my free time for the next 6 months. Antonio's mother, a formidable woman who had raised 4 successful children, took charge of the major decisions while including me in ways that made me feel heard rather than managed. The preparations were elaborate, a ceremony for 200 guests, followed by a reception at one of Portland's most elegant hotels. Everything was beautiful, tasteful, and completely unlike anything I would have chosen for myself. During this period, I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, earning Margaret's praise and a promotion to assistant curator. The increased responsibility came with a significant salary increase, which Antonio celebrated by surprising me with a weekend trip to San Francisco. "I want to show you the life we'll have together," he said as we toured his former colleague's Pacific Heights home. The house was stunning, filled with original artwork and expensive furniture, a testament to the rewards of professional success. Standing in that beautiful house, surrounded by art I could never afford to buy, I felt a strange disconnection from my own life. The woman who had once spent her last $20 on paint seemed like a character from someone else's story. I had achieved everything my family had wanted for me, but the victory felt Pyrrhic, won at the cost of something I couldn't quite name. The disconnection deepened when I encountered my old work during a museum storage reorganization. Mixed in with donated pieces from various local artists, I discovered 3 of my paintings that I had donated during my purge. Seeing them in the professional storage environment, properly cataloged and preserved, gave me a shock of recognition. They were better than I remembered, more accomplished than my post-James crisis had allowed me to see. "These are interesting," commented Dr. Sarah Williams, a visiting curator who was helping with the reorganization. "The artist has a strong voice and unusual perspective. Do you know anything about them?" She was examining Broken Windows, Golden Light, the painting that had witnessed James's betrayal and my subsequent breakdown. "They're mine," I said quietly, feeling like I was confessing to a crime. "I painted them a few years ago." Sarah looked at me with new interest, her professional excitement evident in her brightening expression. "You painted these?" "Elena, they're quite good." "Have you shown them anywhere?" "Are you still working?" Her questions felt like archaeology, excavating a person I had buried so thoroughly that I sometimes forgot she had existed. "I don't paint anymore," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil Sarah's enthusiasm was creating inside me. "I'm getting married soon, and my focus has shifted to other priorities." The word sounded hollow even to my own ears, like a rehearsed explanation for decisions I couldn't fully remember making. Sarah studied my face with the same intensity she had brought to my paintings. "That's a shame," she said gently. "These pieces show real talent and emotional depth. The art world needs voices like yours." She handed me her business card with a gesture that felt like an offering of resurrection. "If you ever reconsider, I'd love to see more of your work." That night I couldn't sleep. Antonio lay beside me, breathing deeply in the satisfied sleep of someone whose life was proceeding according to plan. I slipped out of bed and made my way to his study, where he kept art books alongside his medical journals. Flipping through pages of paintings by artists who had risked everything for their vision, I felt a ghost of my former self stirring in the depths of my chest. The engagement party was held at my parents' house, transformed for the occasion with professional decorating and catering that emphasized the family's pride in my upcoming marriage. Antonio's colleagues mingled with my extended family, creating an atmosphere of celebration that should have felt joyful but instead felt suffocating. I moved through the evening like an actress playing a role, accepting congratulations and admiring comments about my ring while feeling increasingly detached from the festivities. You look beautiful, Mija, my grandmother whispered as she hugged me near the dessert table. But you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? Her weathered hands cupped my face with the tenderness I remembered from childhood, and for a moment, I wanted to tell her everything, about the silence where my creativity used to live, about the dreams I had abandoned, about the growing suspicion that I was making a terrible mistake. Instead, I smiled and assured her that I was just busy with wedding preparations and work responsibilities. She nodded but continued studying my face with the wisdom of someone who had watched many people make choices they later regretted. Just remember, sweetie, she said quietly, it's never too late to change your mind about anything. We love you no matter what you choose. Her words stayed with me through the remaining weeks of engagement, creating a counterpoint to the constant stream of wedding logistics and future planning. Antonio and I had selected our honeymoon destination, a luxury resort in Costa Rica, chosen our future neighborhood, a upscale development near his practice, and even discussed timelines for children 2 years after marriage, once I was established in my career. Every decision felt reasonable and well-considered, but none of them felt like choices I had made from my authentic self. The turning point came 3 weeks before the wedding, when I was working late at the museum on a new exhibition about contemporary Pacific Northwest artists. The show featured painters, sculptors, and mixed-media artists who had found success by staying true to their unique visions rather than following commercial trends. Reading their artist statements and studying their work, I felt a familiar stirring that I had been suppressing for months. One artist in particular caught my attention, Maria Santos, a painter whose trajectory eerily mirrored my own abandoned path. She had spent years struggling in obscurity, working day jobs to support her art, facing family pressure to choose a more practical career. But unlike me, she had persisted, and now her work was being recognized by major institutions. Her artist statement read like a letter from the future I had abandoned. Art isn't a choice for me, it's a necessity like breathing. The world told me I wasn't good enough, practical enough, realistic enough. But art doesn't care about those limitations. It only cares about truth. I found myself crying in the empty gallery, mourning not just my abandoned dreams but the person I had been before doubt and other people's fears had convinced me to become someone else. The tears felt like a dam breaking, releasing months of suppressed grief over the artist I had killed in order to become the woman everyone else wanted me to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Antonio. Working late again? Remember, we have dinner with the wedding planner tomorrow. Love you. The message was kind and considerate, exactly what I would have expected from a man who genuinely cared about my well-being. But reading it while surrounded by art that spoke to everything I had given up felt like receiving a prison sentence disguised as a love letter. I left work early and drove aimlessly through Portland's neighborhoods, eventually finding myself parked outside my old apartment building. The studio where I had created hundreds of paintings was now someone else's home, but sitting there in my car, I could almost feel the ghost of my former creative life calling to me from those windows. That night, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible. I called in sick to work, canceled my appointments for the day, and drove to an art supply store I used to frequent during my painting years. The familiar smell of oils and solvents hit me like a drug, awakening senses I had been suppressing for months. Without allowing myself to think about the implications, I bought a basic set of supplies and a small canvas. I set up the easel in Antonio's garage, the only space in his perfectly organized house that could accommodate the chaos of artistic creation. As I squeezed paint onto a palette for the first time in almost a year, my hands shook with a combination of excitement and terror. What if my family had been right? What if the voice was gone, killed by too many months of practical silence? The first brushstroke answered that question immediately. The color flowed from my hand with the muscle memory of someone who had never really stopped being an artist, only stopped allowing herself to create. Within an hour, I was lost in the familiar trance of artistic process, the outside world fading away until there was nothing but color, form, and the urgent need to translate emotion into visual language. When Antonio found me that evening, I had completed a small but powerful painting, a figure breaking free from gray restraints, reaching toward light that seemed to emanate from within rather than from any external source. His face went through a series of expressions as he took in the scene: the paint-stained garage, my disheveled appearance, and the undeniable evidence that his perfectly reformed fiancée had relapsed into her former obsession. "Elena," he said carefully, his voice carrying the measured tone he used with patience in crisis, "what is this?" He gestured toward the painting and supplies as if they were evidence of a crime rather than tools of creation. "I needed to paint again," I said simply, not moving from my position at the easel. "I've been dying slowly without it, Antonio. I didn't realize how much until today." My honesty felt like stripping off a costume I had worn for so long I had forgotten it wasn't my real skin. His face hardened into the expression he wore when delivering difficult diagnoses. "Elena, we've talked about this. You've built a good life, a stable life. Why would you want to go back to the uncertainty and disappointment? You were miserable when you were chasing this fantasy." "I was miserable because I was trying to be someone else's version of an artist," I replied, standing up to face him fully. "I was seeking approval instead of truth. But this," I gestured toward the painting, "this is who I actually am. This is what I'm supposed to be doing." Antonio ran his hands through his hair, his professional composure cracking to reveal genuine frustration underneath. "Elena, you're 3 weeks away from our wedding. Our friends and family are expecting us to build a life together. You can't just throw that away because you had a moment of nostalgia." "It's not nostalgia," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "It's remembering who I am underneath all the expectations and fear. I love you, Antonio, but I can't marry you. Not like this. Not as someone who's cut out the most essential part of herself to fit into someone else's idea of a good life." The conversation that followed was painful in its civility. Antonio didn't yell or plead. Instead, he retreated into clinical detachment, analyzing my decision as if it were a psychological aberration rather than a moment of clarity. "You're having pre-wedding anxiety," he said with professional certainty. "It's completely normal. We can postpone the ceremony, maybe arrange for some counseling to help you work through these feelings." But I knew with the same certainty that had guided my brush an hour earlier that postponement wouldn't change anything. The life Antonio offered was beautiful, safe, and completely wrong for me. Breaking our engagement felt like amputating a healthy limb to save the whole body, necessary but devastating. The phone calls to family members were the hardest conversations of my life. My mother cried, my father's disappointment was palpable even through the phone, and Isabella's reaction bordered on fury. "How can you do this to yourself?" she demanded during a confrontation that stretched past midnight. "You had everything figured out. You were finally happy." "I was performing happiness," I corrected her, surprising myself with my calm certainty. "There's a difference between being content and being alive. I was dying a little more each day, and everyone was so pleased with my progress toward the grave." Isabella stared at me as if I had announced my intention to join a cult. "Elena, you're 29 years old. You can't keep chasing dreams that aren't going to come true. What happens when you're 40 and still struggling? What happens when you want children but can't afford to support them?" "I don't know," I admitted, and the uncertainty felt liberating rather than terrifying. But I'd rather face an unknown future as myself than a predictable future as someone else's idea of who I should be. The week following my broken engagement was a blur of returned gifts, canceled arrangements, and family conversations that ranged from concern to accusatory. Antonio handled the logistics with the same professional efficiency he brought to everything else, making the practical dissolution of our planned life together as painless as possible. His kindness made the separation more difficult, but it also confirmed that I was making the right choice for both of us. I quit my job at the museum, using my savings to rent a small studio space in southeast Portland. The neighborhood was grittier than the areas where I had lived with Antonio, but it buzzed with creative energy that felt like coming home after a long exile. Street art covered building walls, independent galleries showcased experimental work, and coffee shops hosted poetry readings and acoustic performances that reminded me of the artistic community I had abandoned. My family's concern transformed into disappointed silence as weeks passed without me returning to my senses. They had invested so much in my transformation that my reversion felt like a personal betrayal. Only my grandmother continued calling regularly, her voice warm with love despite her obvious worry about my future. "Mija," she said during one of our conversations, "I don't understand your choices, but I understand your heart. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out what really matters." Her words were a lifeline during the lonely nights when doubt crept in and whispered that everyone else had been right about my impracticality and delusion. The studio became my sanctuary and my laboratory. Without the pressure of proving myself to skeptics or the burden of supporting someone else's vision of my future, I painted with a freedom I had never experienced before. The work that emerged was different from my earlier pieces, more mature, more honest, less concerned with technique than with authentic expression. I painted the gray numbness of my engagement, the moment of awakening in Antonio's garage, the complex grief of losing a good man to save myself. Each canvas became a step in processing the year I had spent as someone else, understanding how I had arrived at such disconnection from my own truth. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been during my first attempt at artistic life. I took a part-time job at a neighborhood cafe, serving espresso to artists, students, and local characters who reminded me why I had fallen in love with creative communities in the first place. The work was humble, but it allowed me to maintain my studio and continue painting without the pressure of immediate commercial success. 3 months after my broken engagement, I encountered someone who would change everything again, but this time in a direction that aligned with my authentic self rather than pulling me away from it. David Chen was Margaret's nephew, a documentary filmmaker who had recently moved to Portland to work on a project about Pacific Northwest artists. He was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an easy smile that suggested someone comfortable with himself and his place in the world. He came into the cafe on a rainy Thursday morning, ordering a double shot of espresso and asking if I knew any local artists who might be willing to participate in his documentary. Something about his genuine curiosity and respectful approach to the artistic community made me mention my own work almost before I realized what I was doing. "You're a painter?" he asked, his interest immediate and authentic. "I'd love to see your work sometime if you're comfortable sharing it." Unlike Antonio's polite interest in my art as a charming hobby, David's enthusiasm felt professional and serious, as if my answer actually mattered to him. I found myself inviting him to visit my studio the following weekend, a spontaneous decision that surprised me with its lack of anxiety. With Antonio, I had always felt the need to justify or explain my artistic choices. With David, conversation about art felt natural and essential, like discussing weather with someone who actually cared about meteorology. When David arrived at my studio, he spent nearly an hour examining my paintings in thoughtful silence, occasionally asking questions about technique or inspiration that showed genuine understanding of artistic process. His response to my recent work was immediate and unguarded. "Elena, these are remarkable," he said, standing before the painting I had created in Antonio's garage. "You're documenting something universal here, the violence we do to ourselves when we try to become someone else's vision of who we should be. This could be part of my documentary if you're interested." The opportunity felt like validation from the universe, confirmation that my decision to return to art had been correct despite its costs. David's project was exploring how artists in the Pacific Northwest maintained authentic voices despite commercial and social pressures, exactly the journey I was navigating in real time. Over the following weeks, David filmed me painting and interviewed me about my artistic process, my family's reaction to my choices, and my struggle to balance practical concerns with creative authenticity. Having someone document my story made me more conscious of the narrative I was creating with my life, and that awareness helped me make choices from intention rather than reactivity. "You're not just making art," David observed during one of our conversations. "You're making a statement about the courage required to live authentically. That's why these paintings are so powerful. They're not just beautiful objects, they're evidence of someone choosing truth over comfort." His words helped me understand what I was accomplishing beyond simply returning to painting. I was demonstrating to myself and others that it's possible to reclaim an abandoned identity, that the person we were meant to be can be recovered even after we've tried to bury her under other people's expectations. As David and I worked together on the documentary, our professional relationship deepened into friendship and then into something more profound. Unlike my relationship with Antonio, which had been built on complementary differences, my connection with David was based on shared values and mutual understanding of creative life. He didn't see my art as charming or problematic. He saw it as essential, both to who I was and to what the world needed. "I've never met anyone who understands the artistic process the way you do," I told him one evening as we reviewed footage from the day's filming. We were sitting in my studio, surrounded by paintings that documented my journey back to myself, and I felt more at home than I had in years. "I've never met anyone who lives their values as courageously as you do," he replied, his hand finding mine across the small table where we had spread contact sheets and notes. "Watching you choose authenticity over security has changed how I think about my own life." Our first kiss happened naturally, without the careful orchestration that had characterized my relationship with Antonio. We were reviewing a particularly emotional segment of interview footage where I had talked about the moment I realized I couldn't marry someone while hiding my true self. As I watched myself on his small monitor, tears streaming down my face as I described the cost of self-betrayal, David reached over and wiped tears from my actual face with such tenderness that I found myself leaning into his touch. "You're so brave," he whispered, and then we were kissing with the passion of two people who had found something they hadn't known they were searching for. Unlike the gentle satisfaction of intimacy with Antonio, being with David felt electric and inevitable, as if we were two parts of something larger than either of us alone. Our relationship developed against the backdrop of the documentary project, which gave us natural reasons to spend time together while also providing a framework for deep conversations about art, authenticity, and the courage required to live according to internal rather than external standards. David's film was becoming a meditation on these themes, using my story and those of other local artists to explore broader questions about creativity and social pressure. 6 months after we met, David arranged for a private screening of The Rough Cut for a small group of local artists and art supporters. Watching my story unfold on screen was surreal and emotional. Seeing myself describe the pain of abandoning art, the numbness of my engagement, and the joy of rediscovering my authentic voice made me realize how far I had traveled in such a short time. After the screening, several people approached me about purchasing paintings, but more importantly, a gallery owner named Rebecca Martinez expressed serious interest in mounting a solo show of my recent work. "Your paintings document something essential about the artistic journey," she said, her eyes bright with professional excitement. "I think Portland is ready for this conversation about authenticity versus security." The opportunity felt both thrilling and terrifying. A solo show would represent everything I had dreamed of during my first attempt at artistic life, but it would also make my choice to return to art visible to everyone who had celebrated my previous abandonment of creative pursuits. My family would inevitably learn about the exhibition, forcing a reckoning I had been avoiding since my broken engagement. David sensed my ambivalence immediately. "What are you afraid of?" he asked as we walked home from the screening, the Portland night crisp with early autumn air. "This is what you've been working toward." "I'm afraid of proving them right," I admitted. "What if the show fails? What if nobody comes, or worse, what if people come but hate the work? My family will see it as confirmation that I'm delusional, that I threw away a good life for nothing." David stopped walking and turned to face me, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Elena, you didn't throw away a good life. You reclaimed your real life. Even if this particular show doesn't succeed, you've already succeeded by choosing to be yourself. The art world's validation is just a bonus." His perspective helped me accept Rebecca's offer, and we spent the next 3 months preparing for what would be my first solo exhibition in a decade. The show, titled Reclamation, would feature 15 paintings documenting my journey from self-betrayal through awakening to authentic expression. The centerpiece would be the painting I had created in Antonio's garage, the figure breaking free from gray restraints toward internal light. As the opening approached, I made the difficult decision to invite my family. They had been part of my story of losing myself, and I wanted them to witness my story of finding myself again, regardless of their reaction. The invitation felt risky but necessary, a final step in owning my choices completely. My mother called within hours of receiving the invitation, her voice tight with emotion. "Elena, I don't understand why you're doing this to yourself again. You had found stability, happiness. Why go back to this struggle?" "Because the stability was killing me, Mommy," I replied, surprised by how patient I felt with her concern. "I know you wanted to protect me from disappointment, but you were also protecting me from joy. I'd rather risk failure as myself than guarantee success as someone else." Isabella's response was more complex, mixing worry with reluctant admiration. "I still think you're making your life unnecessarily difficult," she said during a tense coffee meeting, "but I have to admit, you seem more like yourself than you have in years. Even when you were engaged to Antonio, you seemed dimmed somehow." My father's reaction surprised me most. He said little during our phone conversation, but something in his silence felt different from his usual disappointment. When I pressed him about whether he would attend the opening, he simply said, "We'll see, Mija. We'll see." The night before the exhibition opening, David and I hung the last painting while Rebecca made final adjustments to the lighting. Standing in the gallery surrounded by work that documented my most difficult year, I felt a profound sense of completion. Regardless of what happened the following evening, I had created something honest and beautiful from the wreckage of my misguided attempt to be someone else. "How do you feel?" David asked, wrapping his arms around me as we surveyed the finished installation. The paintings seemed to glow under the professional lighting, each one a window into a different aspect of my journey back to authenticity. "Terrified and exhilarated," I answered honestly. "Like I'm about to find out if everything I believe about myself is true or if I've just been telling myself a beautiful lie." David's embrace tightened, his faith in me radiating through his touch. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said softly, "you've already won. You chose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval. That's the real success, regardless of how many paintings sell or how many people show up." The opening night arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies, which Rebecca took as a good omen. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress that wouldn't compete with the artwork, trying to calm nerves that felt like electrical storms in my chest. David picked me up an hour before the event, looking handsome in a dark suit that complemented his usual casual elegance. "Ready for this?" he asked, offering his arm as we approached the gallery. Through the large windows, I could see Rebecca making final preparations while early arrivals examined the price list and artist statement. The sight of people engaging seriously with my work felt surreal after so many months of creating in private. The first hour of the opening was a blur of introductions, conversations about artistic process, and the unique pleasure of watching strangers respond emotionally to paintings I had created from my deepest struggles. Several pieces were marked with red dots indicating sales, and Rebecca's face glowed with the satisfaction of successful curation. Then I saw them across the crowded gallery, my parents, Isabella, and Marcus, standing before the centerpiece painting with expressions I couldn't read from a distance. My stomach clenched with anxiety and anticipation as I made my way through the crowd toward them, David's steadying presence beside me. My mother was crying, her eyes fixed on the figure breaking free from gray restraints. My father stood with his hands behind his back, studying the painting with the same intensity he brought to important decisions. Isabella and Marcus seemed engaged in quiet conversation about the technical aspects of the piece. "Mommy, Poppy," I said softly, announcing my presence without startling them. They turned toward me, and I saw something in their faces that looked like recognition mixed with regret. "Mija," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, "I didn't understand. I thought we were protecting you, but we were." She gestured helplessly toward the painting, unable to finish the sentence. My father cleared his throat, his eyes still avoiding direct contact with mine. Elena, I owe you an apology. I saw your art as impractical, but I never saw it as necessary. This painting. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. This painting shows me what we almost took from you. What we almost took from the world. Isabella approached and surprised me by pulling me into a fierce hug. I'm sorry, Hermana, she whispered in my ear. I was so focused on protecting you from failure that I forgot to protect your dreams. These paintings are incredible. You're incredible. The reconciliation with my family felt like the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling for months. Their approval was meaningful not because I needed it to validate my choices, but because it represented their willingness to see me as I actually was rather than as they wished I could be. The evening continued with conversations about technique, inspiration, and the courage required to live authentically. David filmed some of the interactions for potential inclusion in his documentary, capturing the moment when an artist's community recognizes and celebrates work that speaks to shared struggles and aspirations. Dr. Sarah Williams, the curator who had discovered my stored paintings at the museum, arrived halfway through the evening and spent considerable time examining the new work. Elena, she said eventually, I represent several collectors who would be very interested in your work. Have you considered approaching galleries in Seattle or San Francisco? Your voice deserves a larger platform. The conversation led to discussions about representation, future exhibitions, and the possibility of my work being included in a group show focused on contemporary Pacific Northwest artists. Each opportunity felt both exciting and overwhelming, representing the kind of professional recognition I had dreamed of but never quite believed possible. As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, David and I helped Rebecca clean up while counting red dots and calculating the evening's success. 12 of the 15 paintings had sold, and 3 serious collectors had left contact information for future work. More importantly, dozens of people had engaged deeply with art that emerged from my most difficult personal experiences. This is just the beginning, Rebecca said as she locked the gallery door. Elena, you've found your voice and people are ready to listen. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Her words felt like both congratulation and warning, reminding me that success would bring its own challenges and pressures. David and I walked home through quiet Portland streets, my mind spinning with the evening's conversations and possibilities. The validation felt wonderful, but what felt even better was the knowledge that I had created something authentic regardless of external recognition. The paintings had accomplished their primary purpose, helping me process and integrate my journey back to myself, and their commercial success was simply an additional gift. How does it feel to be a professional artist again? David asked as we reached my apartment building. His question made me realize that the evening had represented more than just a successful opening. It had marked my official return to the artistic community after my year-long exile. It feels like coming home, I replied, meaning it completely. But more than that, it feels like I've finally become the person I was always supposed to be. All the pain, all the mistakes, all the family drama, it was all necessary to get here. 6 months later, David's documentary premiered at the Portland International Film Festival, with my story serving as the central narrative thread connecting themes about artistic authenticity and social pressure. The film received positive reviews and distribution offers, leading to screenings in other cities where audiences responded strongly to questions about creativity and conformity. My art career continued developing in ways I had never imagined during my first attempt at artistic life. Sarah Williams curated me into a group exhibition in Seattle that toured to 3 other cities, and I received a commission to create a large-scale painting for a new public building in Portland. More importantly, I found myself becoming part of a community of artists who supported each other's authentic expression rather than competing for limited opportunities. David and I moved in together after a year of dating, combining his documentary equipment with my painting supplies in a larger space that accommodated both our creative practices. Living with someone who understood artistic process from personal experience felt completely different from my relationship with Antonio. Instead of one person tolerating the other's passion, we had 2 people celebrating each other's commitment to authentic expression. My relationship with my family continued evolving as they witnessed the success that came from pursuing my authentic path rather than their prescribed one. My mother now brags about my artistic achievements with the same pride she once reserved for Isabella's medical career, and my father has started collecting articles about the importance of creativity in society. Isabella and I have become closer than we were during childhood, bonded by her recognition that she had been living her own version of family expectations rather than personal choice. She recently started taking pottery classes, her first creative outlet since college, and talks about the joy of making something beautiful with her hands after years of purely intellectual work. Looking back on the year I spent trying to be someone else, I feel enormous gratitude for the experience despite its pain. Without the contrast of living inauthentically, I might never have appreciated the profound satisfaction of alignment between my inner truth and outer expression. The woman who was engaged to Antonio taught me what I didn't want. The woman who reclaimed her art taught me what I did. My studio has become a pilgrimage site for other artists struggling with family pressure or societal expectations. Young painters visit to discuss the courage required to pursue uncertain dreams, and older artists come to process their own moments of choosing security over authenticity. These conversations remind me that my story isn't unique. Many people face the choice between comfortable conformity and risky truth. The painting that began this journey back to myself, the figure breaking free from gray restraints toward internal light, now hangs in David's and my living room, a daily reminder of transformation's possibility. Sometimes I stand before it and remember the desperation I felt in Antonio's garage, painting in secret like someone planning an escape. Now I paint in full sunlight, surrounded by people who celebrate rather than merely tolerate my authentic self. Elena Rodriguez, 30 years old, professional artist, partner to a man who loves all of her, including her paint-stained fingers and her tendency to work until she forgets to eat. My life is like a canvas finally painted in true colors, vibrant, honest, and completely my own. The family expectations that once felt like prison walls now seem like temporary structures I was strong enough to walk through rather than around. My story continues unfolding with each new painting, each exhibition, each moment when I choose authenticity over approval. The future remains uncertain in all the ways that matter. I don't know if I'll achieve lasting fame, financial security, or critical recognition, but I know with absolute certainty that I'm living as myself rather than as someone else's idea of who I should be. And that, I've learned, is the only success that actually matters.